The lake was still, a sheet of black glass under the pale moonlight. Not a sound came from the trees. It was the kind of silence that carried weight, like the world was holding its breath. On the porch sat the chief of police, a man who had seen more than most, his eyes steady on the rippling water. This cabin was his escape, his place of peace. But tonight, that silence was broken. Headlights cut through the trees, sharp and sudden. Tires crunched over gravel as several cars pulled up the narrow driveway. The beams swept across the porch, catching the chief's face in white light. He didn't move. He didn't even blink. Doors slammed. Voices rose. A group of people marched forward, papers in hand, clipboards pressed to their chests like shields. At the front was Karen, the head of the HOA, her chin tilted high, her walk sharp with confidence. The chief stayed seated, calm and silent, watching them approach. The only sound was the echo of their footsteps on the wooden boards as they climbed onto his porch. Karen's voice cut the night like a blade. "Chief, this cabin and the land around it now fall under the Homeowners Association's authority. From this moment on, all property use must comply with HOA rules. That means your cabin is ours to manage." She shoved the papers toward him. The words were bold, arrogant, final. But the chief did not take them. He only leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking under his weight. His silence was louder than her demand. The board members shifted uneasily, glancing at each other. But Karen pressed on, her voice louder now, more forceful. "We have bylaws. We have rights. The community voted. This land is part of our jurisdiction now. That means it belongs to the HOA." Still, no answer. The chief's eyes stayed fixed on her, cold and unreadable. The porch light flickered above them, throwing sharp shadows across the scene. The night grew heavier, the shadows deepening around the porch. Karen's son stepped closer, a cocky grin on his face. His voice cut through the silence, loud and careless. "This place is perfect for my birthday party," he declared. "We'll bring music, lights, food, everything. So, Chief, hand over the keys. Don't make this harder than it has to be." The HOA members nodded in support, murmuring agreement. One of them spoke up, holding out a binder of rules as if it were holy law. "According to the bylaws, community property must remain available for community use. This cabin falls under our authority now. That means we have the right to access it." The chief finally moved. Slowly, he leaned forward in his chair, his elbows resting on his knees. His eyes swept across the group, steady and cold. "This cabin," he said, his voice low but firm, "is private property. My property. It does not belong to the HOA. It does not fall under your bylaws. And it is not open for parties." The words were calm, but they landed like heavy stones. Karen's son snorted, rolling his eyes. "You think anyone cares about your private property? We control this lake now. You're just one man. We're the whole board." He stepped onto the porch, too close, too bold. The chief's hand rested on the arm of his chair, steady as stone. He did not rise. He didn't need to. His presence alone filled the air with quiet warning. Karen raised her chin, her voice sharp as a knife. "You can argue all you want, but the law is on our side. You may be the chief of police in town, but here, on this land, we make the rules. We decide what's allowed, and we've decided this cabin is for community use." The chief's gaze locked on hers. "The law is on my side. Property deeds, county lines, state law. All of it says this land is mine, not yours, not the HOA's. Mine." For a moment, silence fell again. The board meet. Embers shifted nervously. The weight of his words pressed on them, but pride kept them standing tall. Karen's son smirked, refusing to back down. "You think we're scared of you? You're just hiding behind a badge. Without that uniform, you're nothing." The chief's lips pressed into a thin line. His eyes didn't blink. His voice dropped lower, each word slow, unshakable. Without this badge, I'm still the man who owns this land, and no one takes it from me. The boy faltered, his grin slipping, but Karen snapped her fingers, rallying the group. Don't let him scare you. He's bluffing. He can't fight all of us. If he refuses, we'll file complaints, lawsuits, fines. We'll bury him in paperwork until he gives up. The chief leaned back once more, his chair creaking under the weight. He didn't argue further. He didn't need to. His silence now wasn't weakness. It was strength. The HOA mistook it for hesitation, for fear. They pressed harder, voices rising, threats piling up. But the viewers could feel it. Under that calm silence, a storm was building. The chief wasn't backing down. He was waiting. And when he struck back, it would not be with words. The tension hung thick in the night, the lake still as glass behind them. The first clash had begun, and neither side would walk away unchanged. By morning, the story had already begun to spread. Small towns have fast whispers, and around the lake, rumors moved quicker than the wind. Neighbors leaned over fences, spoke in hushed tones at the diner, and shook their heads at the news. The HOA went after the chief's cabin. One man muttered over his coffee. Are they crazy? Another woman lowered her voice. They've done it before. Took the Johnsons' dock last summer, forced the Myers family to sell their lot near the woods. People fought back, but in the end, the HOA always won. Everyone had a story. A shed repainted without permission, a boat fined for being too loud, a swing set torn down because it didn't fit the community image. The board had a long history of bullying, and most folks were too tired or too afraid to stand against them. But this time was different. This time, the HOA wasn't pushing around an old couple or a family new to the lake. They weren't circling weak prey. No, this time they had picked a fight with the chief of police. And that realization spread just as fast as the rumor itself. At the grocery store, a clerk whispered to a friend, "They don't know what they've done. He's not like the others. He's the law." At the gas station, two fishermen shook their heads. The HOA's been winning for years, but this guy, he doesn't bend. He won't break. By nightfall, the town was divided. Some were afraid, worried the HOA would tighten its grip if it felt challenged. Others felt something they hadn't in a long time. Hope. For once, someone strong enough had told the HOA no. Meanwhile, the HOA board doubled down. Meetings grew heated. Karen waved papers in the air declaring, "If we don't win this, we lose control of the lake. We must show strength. The chief thinks he's above the rules, but we'll prove he isn't." Her son bragged to his friends that the cabin was as good as his. He laughed about the chief's warning, convinced the man's silence meant weakness. But those who knew the chief knew better. He wasn't a man who wasted words. He wasn't a man who bluffed. If he had stayed calm, it was only because he was waiting for the right moment. The tension around the lake thickened. Neighbors watched from their windows when HOA cars drove by. Some avoided the chief's road, afraid to be seen. Others lingered nearby, curious to see what would happen next. And beneath it all, one truth grew clear. This battle would not be like the others. The HOA had picked their biggest fight yet. And this time, their enemy wasn't just another homeowner. This time, their enemy was the law itself. The next evening, the HOA returned. Their cars rolled up the gravel drive once more, engines humming under the quiet sky. This time, more board members came along, clipboards stacked high, cameras in hand. They wanted proof. They wanted to show the neighborhood they were in control. The chief was already waiting on his porch. The chair creaked as he leaned forward, his hands resting calmly on his knees. His eyes followed the line of cars until the headlights shut off and the doors slammed. Karen led the group, her son strutting beside her. They climbed the steps like they owned them. "Chief," she said, her voice sweet but sharp, "this is your final notice. The cabin is under HOA authority. If you refuse again, we'll fine you, sue you, and drag this through every court we can find." The board murmured in agreement, nodding like soldiers behind their commander. The chief stood at last. His shadow stretched across the porch in the glow of the single bulb above the door. For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the lake, lapping softly against the shore below. Finally, his voice broke the silence. Low, steady, certain. "You're standing on private property. My property. And if you keep pushing, there will be consequences." Karen's son let out a loud laugh. "Consequences? What are you going to do, arrest us? This isn't the station. This is our community. You don't scare us." The chief's gaze shifted to the boy. Then, without raising his voice, he pointed toward the lake. The water gleamed silver under the moon. "Years ago," he said slowly, "a man thought he owned what wasn't his. He built a dock out there, past his boundary line, ignored warnings, laughed at the law, thought nothing could touch him." The HOA board listened, some rolling their eyes, others frowning at the calm story. "One night," the chief continued, "the water rose. Storm hit hard. That dock, gone. Washed away like it never existed. Took his boat with it. Left him standing on the shore with nothing." He let the silence settle again, his eyes sharp as steel. "You think this land is yours. You think these rules make you untouchable. But when the storm comes, when the law comes, you'll lose everything. Just like he did." The air grew heavy. For a second, no one moved. The board members shifted uneasily, their confidence cracked by his words. Then Karen's son barked out another laugh, breaking the tension. "That's just a story. You're bluffing, trying to scare us with fairy tales." Karen forced a smile, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. "Nice speech, Chief, but we're not afraid of stories. This land is ours, and we're not leaving until you see it." The group chuckled with her, mocking his calm warning. They thought he was just buying time. They thought silence and stories meant weakness. But the viewers knew better. They could feel it in his voice, in the way his eyes never wavered. The chief wasn't bluffing. He never bluffed. And if the HOA kept pushing, they would find out just how real his warning was. The night was thick with noise. Music thumped across the lake, wild and careless, shaking the still water. Flashing lights cut through the trees, turning the quiet shoreline into chaos. Laughter and shouts echoed as Karen's son and his friends danced, bottles in hand, convinced they had claimed victory. They dragged coolers down to the dock, strung up lanterns, and shouted over the music. For them, this was a celebration, a rebellion against the man who had told them no. They believed the HOA's power was enough to protect them. But the lake did not share their joy. The dark water stayed cold, silent, almost watchful. And so did the chief. He had been waiting, watching from the shadows of the trees as the party grew louder, rowdier, more reckless. His jaw stayed tight, his eyes sharp. This was no harmless gathering. It was trespassing. It was disrespect. It was a direct challenge. At last, he moved. The music blared, the dock rattled with stomping feet, until the sound of boots on wood cut through the noise. Step, step, step. Slow, heavy, certain. The kids turned, laughter fading. And there he was, the chief of police, no longer in plain clothes. Tonight, he wore his full uniform. The dark fabric caught the light, his badge gleaming like fire under the porch bulb behind him. He didn't shout. He didn't wave his arms. He simply stood there, a shadow of authority made real, his gaze fixed on them. The music stumbled to silence as someone fumbled with the speaker. The sudden quiet was deafening. The laughter died. Bottles hung frozen in mid-air. Karen's son swallowed hard, his smug grin faltering. "Well, we're just having a party," he said, voice cracking. "It's harmless. We're allowed." The chief's voice was calm, but each word carried weight. "You were warned. This cabin, this dock, this land, none of it belongs to you." He stepped forward, the boards groaning beneath his boots. The kids shrank back instinctively, the air around him heavy, unshakable. "This is trespassing," he continued. "It's reckless, and it ends now." One boy tried to laugh, but it came out weak, hollow. Another muttered about calling his parents, but no one moved. All eyes stayed on the chief. Karen's son tried again, louder this time, as if volume could hide his fear. You can't stop us. My mum's on the board. She'll back me up. You don't scare me." The chief didn't flinch. He reached up slowly, the sound of metal clicking as he adjusted the badge on his chest. The shine of it caught the light again, bright and undeniable. "You should be scared," he said quietly. The dock fell silent. Not even the water dared to ripple. The kids shifted nervously, eyes darting toward their cars parked up the hill. The music stayed dead, the party gone before it ever truly began. Because now, standing before them, was not just a man in uniform. It was the law. And the law had finally stepped out of the shadows. The silence on the dock didn't last long. The chief reached into his jacket and pulled out a notepad. His pen moved quickly, each stroke firm and steady. "Names," he said flatly. "Every one of you." The kids shifted, some stammering, others staring at their shoes. Karen's son puffed his chest, trying to act bold. "You can't write us up for a party," he snapped. The chief didn't even look at him. "Citations for trespassing, disorderly conduct and underage drinking. Cars parked illegally will be towed. Parents will be contacted. That's the law." His words were calm, not angry, but they landed like hammer blows. One boy groaned, another cursed under his breath. The weight of real consequences settled over them like a heavy fog. As the chief made his calls, headlights flickered on the road above. Tow trucks rolled in, engines rumbling, ready to haul away the shiny cars lined up along the gravel. One by one, the kids watched their rides get hooked and pulled off the property. Karen's son shouted, his face red. "This isn't fair. You can't do this. My mum will fix it. She'll have your job for this." And almost on cue, more headlights appeared. Several SUVs screeched to a stop. The HOA board spilled out, led by Karen herself, her face twisted in fury. "Chief," she shouted, storming down the hill, "you've gone too far. These are children. This is harassment. You think you can use your badge to bully us? We'll sue you into the ground." Other board members joined in, their voices rising, spitting out threats of fines, court orders, complaints to City Hall, their words tangled together in a storm of rage. But the chief stood calm in the chaos. He waited until the shouting slowed, until their voices cracked under their own anger. Then, in a voice steady as stone, he spoke. "This cabin is private property. This dock is private property. The lake access here belongs to Mickey. Not to you, not to the HOA." He stepped forward, his boots firm on the wooden boards. His voice carried like thunder. "Property law is clear. Trespassing law is clear. Your rules end where my land begins." The board faltered. Their shouting grew weaker, the fire in their words flickering against his certainty. Karen shook her head, clutching her clipboard like a shield, but even she took a step back. The illusion was broken. For years, the HOA had ruled with fear and paperwork. They had bullied and bluffed their way into power. But now, standing before them, was a man they could not push. A man whose authority did not come from bylaws or votes, but from the law itself. The chief's pen scratched the last citation. He closed the notepad, slid it back into his pocket, and gave the board one final look. "You've mistaken silence for weakness. That was your first mistake. This," he gestured to the towed cars, the shaking kids, the broken party, "was your second. Don't make a third." The night was still again. The music was gone. The cars were gone. And with them, the HOA's illusion of control. For the first time, the board looked small. And the neighbors who watched from their windows knew something had shifted on the lake. The HOA had finally met its match. The lake was quiet again. The music was gone. The cars were gone. And with them, the HOA's confidence had drained away. Karen and her board shuffled back to their SUVs, their voices low, their steps heavy. Their threats had lost their sharpness, their power cracked wide open for all to see. The chief hadn't shouted. He hadn't argued. He had simply stood his ground, and that was enough to break them. Neighbors who had watched from their porches that night whispered the next morning. Some smiled for the first time in years. Others laughed quietly, relieved. For so long, the HOA had ruled through fear and pressure. But now the spell was broken. At the diner, an old man stirred his coffee and said, "If the chief can stand up to them, maybe we can too." Another nodded. About time someone reminded them. They don't own this lake. We do. Word spread faster than the HOA could hide it. Families who had been silent found their voices. Letters were written, complaints were filed, and one by one, the board's control began to crack. As for Karen's son, the boy who had started it all, he stayed quiet for once. His party had ended in tow trucks and citations, and no amount of bragging could erase that. Around town, people no longer saw him as bold, but foolish. The lake itself seemed calmer. The nights were once again filled with the natural sounds of water and crickets, not with noise or conflict. Peace had returned, but not the fragile peace of silence forced by fear. This peace was different, stronger. And through it all, the chief remained the same. He didn't boast about his victory. He didn't seek applause. He simply returned to his cabin, to the quiet he loved, and sat once more on his porch. The moonlight danced across the water, silver and still. The chair creaked as he leaned back, the same steady presence as before. But this time, no headlights cut through the tread. See, no footsteps stormed his porch. No papers were shoved into his hands. The HOA had learned the hard way. You don't claim the lawman's land. And on the lake, under the quiet night sky, everyone knew the chief's silence was not weakness. It was strength. The kind of strength that changed everything.